Welcome, everyone. Chief of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, has confirmed this week that Iran is cooperating with the nuclear watchdog regarding the country's civilian nuclear program. Grossi has reiterated that Tehran has granted access to sites that the agency wanted eyes on and satisfied the agency's concerns with respect to two ongoing probes that have now been closed. Yet the Israeli regime has called Grossi's comments and the conclusion of the IAEA probes as capitulation to Iran and a compromise of agency standards. The comments have not been taken lightly by Rafael Grossi and the IAEA. We'll now discuss the IAEA, Iran, and the challenges ahead in our Spotlight program. Joining us is John Bosnitch, journalist and activist and political analyst, joining us from Belgrade. And Sara Flounders from the International Action Center, joining us from New York. Hello, you two. Welcome to the program. I guess we're going to start with you, Ms. Sara Flounders. Now, if you could please, your initial thoughts on the IAEA head, Rafael Grossi's testimony, the level of cooperation that he is seeing from the Iranians, the satisfactory end of these two probes he mentioned, and allegations of the agency watering down its standards, not by Russia, not by China, France, the UK, or the Germans, or even the US, former signatory to the JCPOA, but of all non-players, the Israeli regime.
Well, Grossi's latest recognition that Iran has complied again and again with these intrusive inspections, rounds and rounds, and this has gone on for years, and every fraudulent and fake excuse has been used. It's really time for the whole world to ask, when do the sanctions end? Iran has complied and has been found to be in compliance, and yet US sanctions, UN sanctions continue. When does the IAEA speak out? And instead, they are just used as a plaything, continuing demands by Israel. Why doesn't the IAEA inspect Israeli nuclear weapons? The whole world knows they have them, and yet nothing at all is done. So really, this is political theater and fraudulent in every single way, and it's got to end. It really has to end. It's invasive and intrusive, and it serves no purpose whatsoever except to maintain these criminal, totally illegitimate sanctions.
Thank you, Sara. And John Bosnitch, welcome to the program, sir. And Ms. Flounders has a good point there. We've never seen any other civilian nuclear program, or for that matter, few nuclear armed programs on this planet so scrutinized, persecuted, and prosecuted as we've seen Iran's program be. John, so why is Iran such an exception to international laws and norms?
Well, you can point the finger right away. After the first inspections were announced, the Voice of America, so that's the official voice of the United States government, declared that Iran was complying and was producing information to justify its stance. Then, just 8 hours ago or 10 hours ago, we have the Jerusalem Post announcing that Iran is not complying. And so what is happening here is that US foreign policy is being dragged around by Israel in Israel's interests. And this is a media battle, a battle in international institutions, and it's a battle being led by Israel against Iran, which is most interesting since Israel itself is not allowing inspections or compliance about inspections about its own nuclear activities. That's the explanation for what's happening. Everything else is makeup and lights.
Thank you, John. And Sara, you mentioned Iran has paid a huge price for its efforts to appease Western powers, that its nuclear program is peaceful, a price that's affected the lives, the livelihoods, and the welfare and health of Iranian citizens. Many say the demands have been too high on the Iranian people and the Iranian government, and the benefits have just been too minute. Your thoughts?
Well, from the very beginning, this has all been political theater. Iran has every right to peaceful nuclear development, and they have gone forward with that. And through the whole thing, these charges again and again raised from the U.S., and they're fully complicit with Israel bringing up these charges. That's a role that Israel is slated to play in every point, raising tensions in the region and internationally against Iran. It really is a sign of Israel's desperation, weakened position, lack of standing. And so what else can they rely on except playing just a troublemaker again and again? But really, the sanctions on Iran have to end. There's no other way. There's no other demand. And these intrusive inspections have to end. No other country has been put through this intrusive regime of going on and on. And the IAEA is a totally politicized institution, stacked full of U.S. appointees. It acts in the most unprofessional way. It uses all kinds of leaked reports again and again, and new excuses every time. It's outrageous. It's not an international body. It's a U.S. instrument.
Thank you. And John, 2 days ago, the Times of Israel ran an article how weary the regime is that a second JCPOA or revival may be in the works, now that the IAEA has shown satisfaction with Tehran's cooperation on a number of fronts we just mentioned. Yet Iran has been showing strict adherence to JCPOA parameters, both before the I believe May 8, 2018 pullout of Donald Trump, former U.S. president, from the JCPOA, and even afterwards, you very well know. So basically, when you go above and beyond your calling, and why would unprecedented access to Iran's civilian nuclear program make a regime, an adversary regime like the Israeli regime, weary? I mean, you're getting the eyes and ears that the West wants in Iran. Why would that make you weary, and why would you want to throw a wrench into that when that's supposedly what you want?
Well, I mean, I have my own theories about why Israel is doing this, and that is basically to make sure that Iran is a weak power in every possible way, economically, militarily, in the region with other countries, and so on. It's an attempt to isolate Iran because Iran actually is a high population, highly advanced scientific state that can compete with Israel and will compete with Israel. It's inevitable. So that's my theory about why they're doing what they are doing. And I have to agree with every single word that Sara Flounders has told us today, because it is an outrage and it is an assault on institutions that are supposed to be international and that have actually just become marionettes of U.S. foreign policy and Israeli regional policy. This is a travesty at the level of institutions that are supposed to maintain peace and cooperation around the world. This is the most dangerous aspect. It's the undermining of the fundamental international institutions in the aim of provoking new wars in the region.
And that's a good point, Sarah. What has the Israeli regime, done to allay concerns of its own, unsupervised, weaponized nuclear program, which whistleblowers have time and again said is substandard and extremely dangerous?
Well, the whole world knows that Israel has nuclear weapons, and there's a constant threat in the background about using them. Israel is in a weakened position, and that's dangerous. And actually, the U.S. is also globally in a weakened position, economically, in terms of trade. There's new arrangements, new agreements being reached, particularly by Iran. Iran is no longer isolated, and that's really important. The whole region is slipping outside U.S. control. Whether you look at Syria or Iraq or any country in the region, and particularly at Iran today. There's new agreements being reached and new trade, new alliances being reached. All of that is earth-shaking for Israel and frightening, frankly, because it means that they're isolated. They hoped instead for recognition in the region, for their standing to be normalized. That has failed. And so they're utilizing international organizations just as a plaything, as a way of staggering out longer the sanctions on Iran, and, as I say, these very intrusive inspections, which no country in the world should be forced to go through these steps.
Is that what it is, the IAEA, John, to the Israeli regime, a plaything? Because we know that when it comes to the ICC or the UN Security Council, anytime someone condemns anything Israel does, they say that we don't even count that as a world body. We don't count that as a credible institution. And now the IAEA, today, Rafael Grossi said the agency work is neutral, impartial, and technical. And this after Benjamin Netanyahu said Tehran is manipulating the agency and the agency is capitulating to Tehran. But is it? I mean, is what I'm saying, is the IAEA applying continuity when it asks Tehran about its nuclear program, or when it asks Tel Aviv, or when it doesn't ask Tel Aviv about its nuclear program? So Rafael Grossi, my question is, when he says the work of the agency is impartial, neutral, and technical, does that only apply to Tehran or to everyone else as well?
Look, what Grossi is saying should be taken as fact unless proven not to be fact, like the work of any other international organization. And we also have to remember that the only way that we have evidence that Israel is a militarily armed nuclear power is by the whistleblower, Mordecai Vanunu, who Israel kidnapped in a plot, brought him back to Israel, put him in jail for 18 years, most of that time in solitary. And when he was finally released, he's not even allowed to speak to another member of the public. This is the state of Israel by its deeds. It doesn't matter what they say they're doing. It only matters what they actually do. The one man who told the truth about the Israeli nuclear program basically got a life term in prison. And this is the kind of thing that makes working with Israel so difficult, and which makes so dangerous the very powerful Israel lobby inside Washington, that brings Washington to a condition of not being able to be impartial, even if impartiality is in the interests of the American people.
And thank you, John. And Sara, this gentleman that John refers to, I'm sure you know him, Dimona Nuclear Facility whistleblower Vanunu Mordecai, called the facility unsafe and said that it has 200 atomic hydrogen bombs, atomic weapons, neutron bomb. He said they're not able to say they have a bomb, and they're supposedly not able to destroy anyone. Instead, they come out and they arrest me. Vanunu argued that by refusing international inspections at Dimona, Israel inflames regional tensions and risks a second Holocaust. He was sentenced to 18 years, as John just said, for his concerns and for coming out on this. But it's so funny that the Israeli regime, they'll keep their own facility substandard, treat this gentleman the way they did and lock him up for nearly 20 years. And then when they come out to Iran and they put spies on the ground to possibly, we don't know how they came about these so-called undeclared materials they found at the Marivan site. But why does the agency buy into what the Israeli regime tells them when all the facts they've shown and all their behavior shows that they have some strong contradictions and they're really challenged when it comes to being honest?
Well, first of all, Mordecai Vanunu is really a heroic individual, very courageous, and the penalty for being a whistleblower couldn't be more stark and a real proof. What he exposed at Dimona in terms of nuclear weapons and the danger and the conditions should have been a wake-up call to the world, and instead it was absolutely suppressed. So just to be absolutely clear on that, but why does the IAEA go along with this political theater? Because they're political appointees, because they know it's theater, because they're getting a paycheck for it. I can't look into each of the people, but I would say they now lack legitimacy because they have been willing to turn this international agency that was for control of nuclear weapons into a hunting pack that is only attacking Iran. That has no place, and everyone knows this. So I think there's got to be really an international call against the IAEA, against their inspections, and really a resounding call to lift the sanctions now that Iran has fully qualified again and again, and with every inspection in every way. So, and the sanctions were supposedly passed because of this so-called danger of Iran's nuclear weapons by nuclear powers themselves. How outrageous is that? So there's no impartial in any of this. It really is a weapon to be used as a club against Iran and Iran's development.
Now, John, the regime...
Iran now has other options in the world, frankly.
Pardon me?
And Iran has other options in the world at this point. The isolation is breaking down.
The isolation is breaking down. One could make the argument that with this far-right regime in Tel Aviv right now, that the regime in Tel Aviv has become very much more isolated than Iran is. Iran is opening dialogue more with the Middle East. It's basically, after 7 years of severed ties, it's about to reopen diplomatic missions with the Saudis. The Saudis are speaking to the Syrians. And basically, the U.S. has waning influence, John, in the Middle East with these judicial reforms that Netanyahu's cabinet is about to undergo there in occupied territories. It's going to become, a lot of people feel, much more isolated with its own Western allies. So where does this leave the future of the Middle East if Iran's nuclear program, with a waning U.S. influence in the Middle East and a more isolated regime in Tel Aviv?
Well, ideally speaking, this is all positive. The waning influence of the United States means that the people of the Middle East can decide their own future for themselves. They can create regional blocs, and if Israel could decide to live in peace with the countries surrounding it, now that there have been wars and that those wars are not likely to be repeated, it's high time for Israel to come to grips with the fact that it has neighbors and that those neighbors have to be coexisting with Israel. If Israel continues to twist these kind of international bodies to its own use and against the interests of some kind of a peaceful resolution, the only possible outcome is conflict, and that would ultimately be armed conflict. Israel cannot afford to do that. China has now stepped in and brought Iran and Saudi Arabia to the table together, and the time has come to live like normal human beings on one planet together and stop this continual effort to destroy Iran. That's what it's been, and that's what it's been ever since the Shah fell, and it's high time it ended. It's been decades like this.
And Sara, so now we're at this juncture, and I want to get both of your takes on this, where the IAEA is satisfied with Tehran. A Board of Governors meeting is coming up soon. There's a question, the U.S., this regime with under Joe Biden may want to revive the JCPOA. It's been holding out on giving Tehran guarantees that it said it couldn't up until this point, but there is talk now that the Biden administration may do so, that it's high time to get this thing revived. Now, if this JCPOA is revived, or there is something that is something, maybe it's not called the JCPOA, but there's some kind of sanctions relief, like you mentioned, putting an end to part or all of the sanctions against Iran for some kind of concessions on its nuclear program. How would that look, and how do you think the future looks now that we're moving forward?
I think the future looks good for Iran, and I think it looks good for the whole region, because there are whole new relations that are opening up in stunning ways, where it's more in the interests of every country in the region to open trade and exchanges rather than war. War is in U.S. interests. It's profitable. There's a military industry that operates, that really has enormous control in the U.S. today. And Israel is their instrument in the region. So they want war. They're committed to war, to disruptions, to invasions, to threats. But they're a thing of the past more and more. So I do think that the new relations are the way to go. and pursuing that actively and on every possible front. It really, Yemen, what it means for Palestine, what it means for Syria, for Iraq, we just can't underestimate it. It's tremendous. And of course, it means a great deal for Iran, who has played such a courageous, steadfast role all these years, and now is seeing a new day dawning of new relations. The trade and possibilities with China, that is certainly an exciting potential. There's new currency. There are all kinds of things that are developing that mean the power of U.S. sanctions and threats holds less of a power than it did before. That's important. Now, it doesn't mean that all of these institutions that the U.S. created in the UN Security Council and all kinds of international bodies will collapse tomorrow. No, they'll continue to use them, but they have less weight, and that's certainly true for the IAEA. So they should get on board. The Board of Governors should stamp this, of course, if they have any credibility, if they care about credibility. Instead, what may happen, and we can say it would be reasonable for Biden to join the JPCOA, it would be reasonable for the IAEA to send this report. Will it happen? Based on the past, I don't think so. I think the countries of the region are going beyond it, but I don't think these old institutions that are using repress have much future.
And thank you, Sara. And John,
I don't see this either, frankly.
And a lot of people share your sentiments, Sara. John, how do you see the future looking now with these developments?
Well, I share Sara's view. I think things are moving for the better. I was in Washington working as a consultant in 2007 when John Mearsheimer released his book called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy. That should be mandatory reading for anybody who wants to understand this situation. Here are some figures people have to remember. 60% of the money donated to operate the Democratic Party and to elect its president came from the Israel lobby in America. 40% of the money donated to the Republican Party and its presidential candidate came from the Israel lobby in America. So if you have one lobby that controls both parties, you're stuck in a position between a rock and a hard place. You don't have a way out. One or the other is beholden to Israel. And that's why America has found itself playing the role of puppet of Israel in matters like this that affect the region, that affect Iran, that affect even Saudi Arabia. And finally, China, as a major economic superpower, which is soon surpassing the United States, they are going to bring fair play to the table. And if people aren't willing to play fair, they're going to be the losers. And if that's what Israel chooses to be, that's what it will be. That's a real pity for the people of Israel, for the people of America, and for the people of Iran and everybody in the region. It's time to clean up the act and live like proper human beings who believe in some common values.
Okay, thank you both for joining us on the program. Time has gotten the better of us. Stay safe to both of you. John Bosnitch joining us from Belgrade and Sara Flounders joining us out of New York. And viewers, thank you for joining us. This brings us to the conclusion of your Press TV Spotlight program. Thanks for joining in, and bye-bye for now.